Because it's still showing up. It's just probably a preview bug. Would be my guess.
Gotcha.
Yeah, already is good. Alright. Video is good. Alright. Yeah. Let me tweet out that we're gonna go live. That way we can get going. Okay, that's good. Let me grab chat. Okay, got that. Now I have to move this back so I don't cover all the cameras.
Okay, so I'm gonna have you hang out there.
Alright, I'm good.
You're good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's get this party started.
Alright, let's go ahead and hit record.
Yep.
Okay, audio sync in 3, 2, 1. Whatever. That's fine. Alright,
uh,
let's do a show.
let's do it.
You are listening to Overwatch League Network, The Backcap, the podcast with insight on the Overwatch League's path to pro and contenders analysis. Here are your hosts, Emily Drunk and Ren. Hello everyone and welcome to Overwatch League Network, The Backcap. I am your host, Emily Drunk, and tonight on episode 10, we go around the path to pro in Overwatch contenders, specifically focusing on the NA and EU scene. And Ren, you know, today has been something. I mean, we had some unexpected results, and we do have some pretty big news. But really, like, you know, we're hot off the heels of Overwatch League Stage 2 playoffs, and I don't know if you got a chance to check out all of that stuff, but, Contenders is in full swing, and things are really starting to take shape at this point.
Oh yeah, there's been a lot going on. I did watch the semifinal game for the OWL playoffs, but I didn't watch the final between the Spitfire and New York because things happen and life, whatever. But this week has been pretty interesting in contenders too. So I think we'll definitely have some interesting things to talk about with the games from today.
Absolutely. So before we get into the games from today, because of how the schedule worked out due to Overwatch League, next week we're gonna have our hands full just based on the schedule, having so many games all kind of compacted into one week. So next week we're gonna have a ton of games to talk about, but we do have some pretty big additions to some of these academy teams, and we gotta start off by talking about a player that we've talked about in the past across our network shows, and that is Flower. Will he? Won't he? The answer is he will, because the New York Excelsior star player has joined the ranks of their academy team and will be debuting for XL2 in like an hour from right now. He is debuting tonight for XL2, and, Flower, he really rose to prominence during last year's World Cup. We got to see him compete for South Korea, and really to say that he had a breakout performance on the Widowmaker might be a little bit of an understatement. I kind of, made him become more of a, household name in competitive Overwatch, and there's just been so much hype built around him, and for good reason. Now, That being said, Flower is turning 18 later in May, which means that he is not eligible to play in Overwatch League Season 1. He's, after the cutoff point for that, so unfortunately he won't be able to compete with the New York Excelsior outside of their academy team. But, looking at it like this, we do know that, there's still a little bit of time in a sign-in window for the Overwatch League picking up players. But, that being said, you have to imagine that New York, as a franchise, is going to have some sort of massive sign-in bonus to really dissuade him from going anywhere else. But do you think there is an offside chance that we might see Flower competing for a different organization outside of New York? Or is he pretty much locked in at this point?
Um, that's an interesting question just because he's going to XL2 Academy, and like we've talked about several times on the show before, it would make sense for those academy teams to be direct feeds into their Overwatch League counterparts. I think that's what NYXL wants, but based on how well they're performing already and how stacked their roster is in the current season, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if another team did try to pick him up in Season 2 of Overwatch League. Whether or not another team is going to have the resources or want to ruffle the feathers to do that is another question, though. So we'll see.
Yeah, I have a feeling like they have some massive sign-in bonus because, if a contenders or if an Overwatch League team is going to try to sign him, they're basically having to pay that 25% rate of the flat fee of, 50 grand a year on top of whatever the sign-in bonus is. And, I don't think that New York, despite what their current track record, is just going to let him go up, for nothing, basically.
Right.
Yes, they do have Libero, who has been their flex god, as we saw throughout the season already for the New York Excelsior. And, he did pretty much turn that whole series around in that reverse sweep in the grand finals against the Philadelphia Fusion. But I know a lot of people are like, well, with Libero doing so good, is there really a spot for Flower on this roster? And it's hard to say, because both of them have looked really good on the Widow. Libero has played a ton of other stuff, and we haven't seen quite as much flexibility with Flower, but that's not to downplay his capabilities as a player. So who knows, maybe we'll get into a situation where they're going to have, like, a 1v1 to decide, okay, who's going to play the Widow for this team? But at the end of the day, I mean, New York already has 3 DPS, essentially, if you include Jonak, and if you add Flower into the mix, I mean, that's basically a 4 DPS meta, and no one's going to be able to handle that, but I am just excited to see Flower get in to see some play, because you don't want to have, one of your players, or one of your prospects, really, just kind of sit in idle at this point. Yes, he's in LA, he is with the team, but, he's not screaming with them. So you want to be able to really keep him on top of his game and have him evolve and kind of, work more stuff into the rotation for his hero pool moving forward.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they did go to great lengths to sign him to NYXL for Season 2, and then kind of try him out and see who fits best in the lineup, and then maybe even end up dropping one of their DPS players later on in Season 2. Or trading them to another team, something like that. But
I don't know who you would drop in that situation. Just
right,
based off
I don't
of
either, but
what
that's
we've
why.
seen.
Yeah, they'd have to kind of go through trials, but you never know.
All right, well, we do have a transfer coming out of Contenders Korea that we need to talk about because this is going to affect, the Overwatch League and the LA Gladiators. So, Void from Kondu Panthera has been picked up by the LA Gladiators. Gladiators, they had firm control of their playoff destiny, and it didn't work out that way. They had a 3-0 or 4-0 Boston Uprising, and Boston Uprising played the spoiler on Boston's best map, so the first map that they played, and basically crushed LA's playoff hopes. But what does this mean for the LA Gladiators? It means that Void is going to be rejoining his former KDP teammate Fisher on that front line for the LA Gladiators, and Void was a member of that original Kondu squad that was signed to the London Spitfire initially, but they were unable to reach an agreement on a contract, so he stayed with that org, basically. So he's remained in Korea to play for that squad, with like a rebuilt roster for Kondu. And it also features like Waka Waka, who's been one of the better, Lucius for a long time in Korea. I mean, I don't think anyone ever considered him to be better than Toby from, Seoul Dynasty, but he was always in the discussion at least. And, Luffy was also there as well, and that is a team that finished second in Apex in the prior season. But, like, at the end of the day, what do you think that this is going to mean for Bishu on the LA Gliders? Because he's basically been filling an off-tank role and also kind of acting as a translator because they do have a pretty mixed roster. Like, do you think Void's just going to come in and, just bring in more, just, I'm not going to say flexibility. He's just going to he's going to have more of, he's going to be just more reliable, I think, because he already has that pre-built synergy
Yeah.
with Fisher already, or are they going to value the communication over him?
Right. Well, I think that Bishu has done a fine job so far, and that having that capability of translating helps a little bit. But at the same time, if you're translating things in the middle of a match, anyways, like you're not performing to your best ability, basically, because you have that disconnect. I think that Void coming in to partner up with his former teammate and go at it together again will really solidify the LA Gladiators tank line, because their tank line throughout season one has been the biggest struggle that they've had. Before they had Fissure, I mean, they had iRemix trying to try, and it was just bad. And Fissure has done a really good job of cleaning it up, and I think that Void coming in will help solidify that even more. There are lots of other teams out there that are bilingual, trilingual, that have found ways to work it out. And I think that doing some calls in Korean or some calls in English, like a lot of teams will be able to learn at least the basics of the other language, just to be able to communicate for the game. So I don't think that Bishu will immediately be sidelined, but there will be a transition, and I think Void will come in to be our starter once people are over the whole communication problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that aren't familiar with Void, he does play a pretty hard carry diva. And his defense matrix management, especially when it comes to Eden Ultimates, has been pretty top notch. So, he's not ironically named in that sense, because, all those ultimates do kind of fall into the Void. But I'm really excited to see him just get realigned with Fissure again, because, Fissure just brought so much to that team, and having another really solid tank on that front line is only going to make them that much better. I mean, Fissure basically made, the Gladiators like one of the, bottom half teams to, being in a playoff run, and while they didn't make it, you can't downplay the success that they did have as soon as Fissure was on that front line for that team. But moving on, we do have quite a bit of news to talk about over with sign-ins and additions, and a little bit of drama in terms of contenders. So we're gonna kind of like group some of these up together, and then we'll kind of like note, anything of importance here. So looking at last night's leftovers, they have picked up Nex. And he is no stranger to the Tier 2 scene. He is a flex tank, and in the past he's played for Team Expert, LFT OWL, and was recently the mouthful team known as Squid12324. Why you would pick that many numbers, I don't know. But with LFT OWL, that was a team that had won a lot of like the weeklies over in Europe for Go for Overwatch, so he's been pretty prominent in the Tier 2 scene at least, and he does play D.Va and Zarya. Looking at that's a disband who did see play earlier over in Europe. They picked up a new support player in Insomniac. And, hopefully he can wake up that backline who hasn't really been seeing much protection on that team. And his longest tenure, at least in competitive Overwatch, was with Toronto Esports, so another, contenders org there. And, kind of the same thing with Insomniac. This is another player that has been pretty successful in the weeklies, but this side, it's more on the Academy Gaming weeklies that are going on, so more the NA side. And then we have Toronto Esports. So they had a tank player leave the team that is Pumple, and actually picked up Axiom, and this is a questionable pickup for many reasons. Well, for starters, like looking at the tank that left, apparently they left amicably, so we don't really know like the reasoning behind why Pumple had left the team, but, you know, Axiom has been picked up to fill in the main tank position, and this is a player who had a different alias at one point. He played for NC Foxes over in Korea, but he left because it was discovered that he was an account booster. And if you are familiar with the Korean scene in Overwatch, you would know that that is a pretty big no-no, and they will basically try to exile you from competitive Overwatch because, you know, esports are taken very seriously in Korean culture. Now, that being said, this is not the first time we've been dealing with boosters in Overwatch or just the competitive scene, and we've even seen it kind of trickle into the Overwatch League. We have Sato from the Philadelphia Fusion, who was actually the head of an account boosting organization, who got suspended for 30 games. And looking at Dallas Fuel, they have OGE, who is one of their newer pickups, who is one of their tank players, and not the first time, Dallas Fuel tank player has been suspended, but his is only 4 games, so a lot less than Sato, only because, he wasn't the head of the org as the trains are rolling in. But my question to you is, do you think that these other regions should start taking a similar stance to Korea when it comes to account boosting because of the negative effect that they do have just on the scene as a whole?
Oh, definitely. I mean, 100%. That's why we've seen a couple of cases of people trying to crack down on that kind of behavior in Overwatch League, and I think that it starts there because that's the pinnacle, the legitimate entity, and that if Blizzard says we're going to put our foot down and everyone, the community as a whole says we're going to put our foot down and not tolerate this kind of thing, then that'll trickle down into contenders, into other areas of esports as it has already in Korea, because it's just unethical and not good. It's not sportsmanlike, so I think that should not be included in our esports.
Yeah, and the pro players have been very against the boosters obviously coming in and getting Overwatch League spots, because you have a lot of players who are very young. They have worked their asses off to get to where they are. They've dealt with their own shady organizations in the past at times, which, spoiler, we're going to talk about one in a little bit, because one of them is a Contenders team. But, it does kind of... It definitely changes their mindset, because they look at, okay, it's like, okay, so I put in all this time, and then somebody that was just actively, boosting accounts now is in the same limelight as me, and they don't like that because they see it as unfair. So, they have their own business, so they should just stick to that rather than getting an opportunity that they really shouldn't be getting. So, they have a pretty strong stance against this. And really, Toronto in this case kind of paints them in a worse light than they were in prior. So, I don't know. I feel like as a whole, regardless of whatever differences there are in the cultures, they need to reevaluate how they're bringing these players in. I don't think they have a spot in competitive Overwatch just because it's just not right, and you have so many players that are working, 10 times as hard as some of these players, and then them just being able to squeeze in without really having the same work ethic really speaks a lot.
Yeah, I was just going to say there are so many other players that are just as skilled and have just as much of a right to be considered for competitive Overwatch in the professional circuit, and instead people are giving out spots on what should be top tier teams to people of questionable background. So it's not okay.
Right. And speaking of players that have been working really hard for a long time, I am so happy to announce this next sign-in to Young and Beautiful, and I'll start by saying the one I'm excited about, and that is Shatter 2K. So, Danny, who was their Flex Sync, recently left this team, and so did their Flex DPS, who has a really, I'm gonna butcher this name because it's a weird name. It's like Spox X, or Spox Ez, whatever. It's a weird name. The X and Z throws me off. But they did pick up Flex Tank Emil, who had played for Mosaic Esports, who we'll talk about here in just a minute. But Shatter 2K is a projectile specialist who has been one of the better Genshis in the world for quite some time, and I am shocked that it took him so long to find the team. Because, we saw him kind of rise to prominence when he played for Team Liquid, and there was a lot of hype around his Genji play, especially when he had the Dragon Blade. He was always going like toe to toe with Shadowburn, just to kind of like put it on par with someone that some people will be more familiar with. But Shatter is looking to prove himself here in Contenders, with aspirations obviously to join the Overwatch League, hopefully for season 2. But Young and Beautiful, that's another team that's kind of been in the middle of the road, and there's 2 new additions, so we'll see how they are going to gel with this team. But I'm just so happy to see Shatter getting to see some playtime, because it has been far too long, and he just hasn't really been given the opportunity to really prove his worth so far.
Yeah, totally. No, I'm excited to see how it plays out for them. Hopefully it'll help them kind of break out of the middle of the pack and see what it can do for them.
All right, so going back to Mosaic, talking about shady business. So
Sure.
it's been a week for Mosaic. So let's start off with how this all started. So on Monday, we had Value Taha and Emil leaving Mosaic Esports, and Value Taha had left like some comments over on his Twitter, kind of talking about some stuff that was going on behind the scenes with this organization, and he had mentioned that he was going to be taking some time off to kind of, recharge and refresh. And he'd warned other players about the Mosaic Esports CEO, Brandon Kim, who had still owed the players $20,000. Now, Brandon Kim has since stepped down as the CEO of Mosaic Esports after, these repeated delays in regards to the player payments, and it is worth noting that he was also the only investor in this org, and, he followed up and deleted his Twitter account, he deleted all of the organization's email accounts, all of that, but due to this, Mosaic Esports is no more. So, what does that mean for Contenders, and what does it mean for the players that are still on the team? Well, they're still going to be able to finish out the remainder of Contenders. But in regards to the payments, they were on time up until January, and that was when we saw like this second iteration of Mosaic roster being made, because there was a time last year where they also were kind of doing a restructure, where they were starting to build some hype, and then nothing really happened, and then they just had more changes a couple months later. But Mosaic Esports kind of dissolving here, and you look at the Europe scene, and you look at the investors, and then you hear things like this happening, and it just, you gotta feel bad for the players. We need to have, lawyer representation for these players, so, they're not basically making less than minimum wage because they're not getting paid.
Yeah. No, and that's exactly what I was just going to talk about, is the legal representation, because the CEO, Brandon Kim, said, or not said, but seemed like he was trying to basically just erase himself off the planet so that he could try to get out of the sticky situation that he's gotten himself into. But what is getting breezed over is that these players signed contracts with the organization. Like, he is contractually obligated to pay them X number of money on X date, and that's not something that he can run from. But if the players don't try to pursue that with a legal threat, for lack of a better word, then organizations are going to be able to get away with that kind of stuff. And these players have worked too hard and too long to be able to just put up with that. That's not fair to the players, and it's not fair to the league as a whole. I mean, they still get, like you said, they still get to continue on in Contenders, but I mean, they're doing it out of their own pocket now. So it's got to be a lot more stressful for them.
Right, and I can only imagine like how that affected the team morale at that point too, if they're not getting paid, because Mosaic hasn't had the best start in Contenders, and now we have a better understanding of what is exactly going on with this team. Obviously, there's a lot of turmoil between them and the former CEO of Mosaic Esports, and I'm not going to say like it's too late for them to turn things around, because it's not, but I'm not very optimistic about them being able to do so, just knowing that, they're basically trying to feel like an incomplete team at this point, so I don't know. We'll definitely keep an eye on it, but hopefully, this isn't, I mean, I just hope this won't be the last time this, I can't talk. This can't always happen, because we keep hearing it like time and time again. It's not just always in Europe. I mean, this does happen. in business, you are always going to have shady people.
Yeah,
So hopefully they can find a better home.
yeah, for sure.
All right, well, let's go into the results from this past week. And I know we have games going on literally right now over on the NA side. Guys, we will cover that next week, just because the games will basically be going on throughout the night. And obviously, it wouldn't give us enough time to analyze those games that did happen, but we did have some games over in NA that was yesterday. So we'll go ahead and start with that, and we'll do our takeaways before moving on to what's going on in Europe. So, looking at the first game on Tuesday, we had Envision Esports defeating Bye-Week 4-0. So, the Bye-Week name meme is continuing, as it's basically just a free win. We also saw Optic Academy defeat Energy Esports 2-1. And Fusion University defeated Simplicity 3-2. Okay, so, Fusion University, probably one of the most hyped teams in NA. Is individual play going to be enough for this team? And that is the biggest question mark on this team right now. They may currently be sitting atop Group B in Contenders NA, but things have not come easy as they would like them to. Because in those 3 games that they have played, they have a map record of 9-6-0. So they've just been plagued with some inconsistencies, and, we touched up on some of them here in the last week. But it's too often that this team is getting off to a slow start in the series.
Yeah.
And they're heavily having to rely on individual play by their DPS, especially Zachary, who has been absolutely nutty on the Tracer. And while, yes, individual play can turn things around in the clutch, their teamwork has looked extremely spotty. So you look at, the scrappiness factor of this team. What does that mean, basically? It means that they're really good on control maps. They're 6-1 and 0 on control maps. They do really well there, but when it comes to more team-based map types, like Payload, or Escorts, they have a 33% win rate on Escort maps, and that is a far cry from how they're doing on control. So, yes, they are one of the scrappier teams out there, but they are falling behind in a lot of other areas at this point. So really, how much longer do you think that this individual skill can carry this team, and can it be enough to actually, allow them to go deep into contenders, especially in the playoffs?
I mean, the short answer to that is that it's not going to carry them that far, because any number of teams out there have good individual skill on their team, but they can also play well as a unit, and you need to have both to actually be able to be successful. That's just how it is. That said, Fusion does have a lot of strong individuals. You mentioned Zachary, Who Are You, also comes in clutch with a lot of those crazy Genji moments and stuff like that, but it's just not enough to carry the team into playoffs and into contention for a top spot. We had really high hopes for this team coming into the season, and I would like to see them be able to turn it around. But if they can't come together and work as a unit, as a team, then that's just not going to happen. And you mentioned their map record too. They have played to 5 maps in every single one of their games so far. That alone goes to show that, like you said, they have a slow start, and that was the case in this series as well, So I think that unless they can start locking down objectives and playing together better earlier on in each series, then it's not gonna turn around for them.
Yeah, the more, map 5s that you're going to end up seeing, the more fatigue is going to set in the long run for this team as well. But, that is not the only questionable play that we saw over on the NA side. And I know there is one line in particular that you want to talk about coming from Simplicity. So what is going on with Simplicity right now?
Yeah, same game. And we saw, I think, part of the reason that it went to map 5 is just both teams, Fusion and Simplicity, were looking a little shaky this week. Simplicity also had a rocky start to the series. And what I saw as the biggest issue in their play was their support line. Of course, these guys are in contenders. They're great players and all that stuff. But what I kept noticing a couple of times, especially later on in the series, were some questionable ultimate usages. And I think that that's something that I've seen as a theme for supports in general in competitive Overwatch is that a, a good support is marked by how effectively he can use his ultimate abilities, especially on those really impactful ones like Transcendence, like Sound Barrier, like Valkyrie before it got nerfed. And there were just several times in the series where Wanjali, their Simplicity's, what's that called? Zenyatta. Simplicity's Zenyatta. I mean, he had this. There was a moment on Hollywood where the team fight was basically over and he kind of went in and tranced and it didn't really do anything. I think it seemed like it was reflexive and he just kind of panicked because he got jumped on, but I didn't really know what was going on there. And things like that just kind of happened a few more times throughout the series where it was either delayed reactions or it looked like poor communication between the team when the supports weren't talking to each other, knowing who was going to ult when, that kind of stuff.
Right, I think overall, at least looking at that support line, I think Ginger Pop, like across the board, has been fairly consistent for him on Simplicity. But, you know, we did see some pretty fun moments from Ginger Pop because he did go Battle Mercy and gun down Who Are You? But the major takeaway I took from his play this week was that he really needs to be mindful when he's on Ana because there were a few too many times where he was trying to sleep dart and it got deflected back.
Yep. Yeah, several times that happened, and it was funny to watch every time, but it was just sad when it happened the third and fourth time, however many it happened.
Yeah, it was quite a few. But yeah, you brought up Wanjali Lee. You know, it is worth noting like that is their newer acquisition on a support line, and he is also Korean. So, you know, there could be some comm issues there. So, you know, a little bit rougher go for him. But, you know, I say give it another week of solid scrims, and, you know, we might see a better overall performance coming out from the support line. And, you know, just because of, you know, how many people are going to be moving in and out, you know, you have to, you know, take that into account, too. These rosters are going to be shuffling quite a bit in the upcoming months, so, you know, just keep that in mind because they're not always going to basically just have the same six in pretty much every time. But, you know, speaking of, you know, some teams, we got to talk about, like, some team compositions that we have seen. And really, like, something that I've noticed in Contenders is that, I mean, that's at least different from what we're seeing in Overwatch League, is we're actually not getting to see Tracer in every single map. Now, that being said, we still see a ton of Tracer, just not to the same extent. And, you know, Tracer is, you know, pretty prominent in the meta. And, you know, there's a pretty good reason for it. It shouldn't come as a surprise because, you know, she is essentially the game's poster girl. Hell, she's even in the Overwatch League logo. I mean, she's even in our logo for Overwatch League Network, if you haven't paid attention to that. But...
What?
Yeah, I know, like, crazy. But, like, really, like, do you think that these non-Tracer comms are more fun to watch, and what do you think it is about that hero in particular that makes her almost a must-pick in this current meta?
I just flat out, I think they're totally more fun because you see Tracer so often, especially in Overwatch League, and even rather often in Contenders, seeing her not picked and seeing a different comp come out is always more interesting to me just because it lends itself to a different type of gameplay. Tracer has a very specific type of gameplay in what she hopes to achieve on the battlefield. And when she's not picked, teams are forced to play in a different style, basically. The role that she plays is necessary, and that's why we have the quote-unquote Tracer meta, because she is able to just be extremely mobile and put out that chip damage. Having that having that go out and also having her be like a very independent hero at the same time is, I think, necessary just to be able to have something. Man, I'm having a hard time iterating my thoughts here, but something in the team fight, basically, that is also not in the team fight, you know? Mm-hmm. You see a lot those Tracer v Tracer duels or whatever it is, where Tracer is kind of off doing her own thing, but still contributing, and I think that it allows people to be more objective-minded in their play rather than focused on, like, oh, I'm going to dish out the most damage and get the most kills. Like, it A player that comes to mind from Overwatch League is Soon on the LA Valiant. I mean, he's always kind of sneaking around and doing more of this recon style tracer. So I think that she has a place in the game, and I think that she is necessary just in her current form because of the versatility that she brings to a lot of comps. But it is really cool to see her not picked as often and see people go with different comps. Sorry, I know that was kind of rambly, but
But yeah, I mean, like
yeah,
for me,
I don't
like
know.
when you're spectating Tracer, I think one of the things that has been, interesting is the fact that we do see so many different approaches to the Tracer play. I know you brought up Soon, who does more of the sneaky, I'm just going to try to backcap you whenever I can type Tracer,
Yeah.
but you do have some Tracers that just completely ignore the Tracer tool altogether. You have others that are more
Mhm.
of the farm the pulse bomb off with the D.Va and go for the D-Mech, which works pretty good, especially against school Met. You have the Tracers that are just, trying to harass the backline and just get eaten up by Zenyatta's at times. So, I mean, there's so many like different layers of her gameplay, just different approaches that you can take, and it doesn't always translate for certain people, especially certain teams, like Houston Outlaws, but that is another tale for another podcast. But, we do see different flavors coming out from these team picks, and, we've seen Tracer here and there. We've seen Tracer paired with Genji mostly for the dive. We've seen Tracer and Tracer Light, aka Sombra, which has been interesting because it's basically just a second Tracer essentially. Uh, but
Yeah.
but we do have different looks that we're seeing that we aren't seeing in the Overwatch League, and that's just due to the fact that we are on a different patch. So definitely keep an eye on the pick rates going forward. But I just wish like with Winston's Lab that we did get, the pick rates and the fight win percentages and things like that, like we do for the Overwatch League. We don't have access to that stuff, so it does make the analytical stuff a little bit harder just because we don't have all those stats readily available to us.
Right.
So I,
Yeah.
I can't directly compare the pick rates between, the top of the pro scene to the tier 2 scene, which I would love to do.
Yeah, and actually talking about a little bit about those stats as far as pick rates go. I mean, a couple of weeks ago it was where Blizzard published the pick rates in each ranked play bracket of for each hero, basically like the top 10 most picked heroes in each player bracket. And something that I noticed there was that you saw a trend upward in Tracer picks as you went higher in brackets,
Hmm.
and that's because she requires a very high level of skill to play effectively. She's a very fast-paced hero. She has, I don't want to say a niche role, but she has lots of niche roles. She has very different, like you said, very different ways of playing her. Um, and so that's why we see her so much at the higher level of play, be it ranked or in competitive professional Overwatch. I mean, there are so many approaches to her, and you can be really effective at her if you have the skill to do so.
Yep, and the other takeaway that I had from that report was that D.Va was by far the most popular across everything. Doesn't matter
Oh
where you are rank-wise, D.Va is number one. But getting back on track, let's go ahead and look at what is going on over in Contenders Europe. So we had some games earlier today, or this morning, early afternoon, and it was, in fact, for Overwatch, and a very interesting for Overwatch at that, because, yeah, those people putting up the goose eggs were the favorites in every single match. So, we kick
yeah.
things off with Orglis and Hungary defeating British Hurricane 4-0. We saw Team Singularity 4-0, that's a disband. And we also saw Angry Titans 4-0 Team Giganti. So, it's, not what we expected at all, to say the least, but we did see Orglis and Hungary really step up and impress today. So, Ren, what did you see out of that team today that really, stood out to you from them?
Um, First of all, when I was watching the Orglis and Hungary match, I was like, "Oh wow, like this is crazy. They're doing so well against the British Hurricane. British Hurricane's a favorite. I think we might have to find a new spot at the top of the rankings somewhere for Orglis and Hungary because of how well they're doing." And then I kept watching the next games throughout the day, and I was like, "Oh, never mind." I mean, Orglis and Hungary did great, but today was just a complete fluke. I was like, "Whoa, what's going on?" But anywho, Orglis, I mean, they definitely stepped up in a big, big way. Their whole team really operated well, but I want to hone in on their DPS play. I mean, Shax's Widow today was a ton of fun to watch. I love watching Widow duels. I think it's super crazy to see those nuts shots across the battlefield. It's just really, really entertaining. And Facility also super impactful with the Genji. I think that especially at the beginning of the matchup, both teams, Orglis and the British Hurricane, had a tendency to kind of snowball during their match, which made their fights very even, I guess. Even though the score ended up being 4-0, just in the sense that they would not really, and I mean snowballing not in a good way. Like they would snowball against each other and just like trade picks, and then they would come back in, and it would just be sloppy. But they cleaned up later on, and it was really through their DPS. I think, especially on, I think Junkertown was the last map, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Shax's Widow then was just like on point, and it was really good to watch, like I said.
Yeah, definitely their DPS stepped up big today, but I do want to point out, like, Shax on the Widow basically, like, really rose up, kind of like after the series was already kind of decided at that point. But something that I want to point out was the fact that in this series, Orglis opted to run a lot of Mercy in their lineup. And what this led to was Immortal basically just coming in, being able to secure some pretty clutch resurrects in the team fights, and he was able to really peel for Eps better than, the Hurricanes could for their Lucio players. So, having that ability to really protect that backline really paid dividends for Orglis in Hungary, and, that was a team that did pretty good over in the trials over in Europe. So, while I didn't think that they were top 2, top 3, they're definitely going to be in the discussion after that performance that they put in. And, with British Hurricane going down today, my thought was like, okay, this is Team Gigante's chance. They can, take control of first place. And then they also got 4-0'd. So, I mean, at the end of the day, we kind of have to look at today like, okay, this is the rise of the underdogs. This was a day of unpredictability. I don't know if everyone was so hyped from, the Philadelphia Fusion showing, being the unlikeliest, team to make the Overwatch League Stage 2 playoffs, needing to have so many things go right in order for them just to have that chance, and then them upsetting London Spitfire after not taking a single map off of them in a past, and then taking New York Excelsior to a Game 5. It could have been that, I don't know, but it was just absolutely crazy what we saw today. I mean, it was just upset after upset after upset, and while I know Singularity and That's a Disband were both kind of at the lower end, Team Singularity did have a worse map record overall than That's a Disband did, so technically, yes, it is an upset despite what their overall records may show. But really, though, you had both Juggernaut teams fall. Gigante and Hurricane have, been pretty highly rated by a lot of the community. And I feel like at this point we definitely have to talk about the Hurricane and their tendency to just not want to swap off of dive compositions because they've just been far too reliant on it, and it wasn't working today. They need more heroes to kind of fall back on because what they're doing is too one-dimensional. And we need to see more flexibility on this team, which I'm pretty sure that it's something that you had brought up in the past, and I was like, well, it's been working out so far.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm sitting here like, thank you for saying that, because I've been, like, all day I've been thinking about that. I'm like, if British Hurricane were just more flexible in their comp, they might have been able to pull something out of the bag, but they just play dive and play dive and play dive, and that makes them predictable, and I'm just like sitting here fuming because I'm like, come on, guys! I know you're better than that, and it's just something that I've been noticing and seen in them before. So thank you for bringing light to that.
Yeah, and it was the same case for Gigante too, because we saw they were going up against a Pharah. Angry Titans were running a Pharah, and they just decided, okay, we're just going to keep running dive, which doesn't do so hot against Pharah. They didn't try to switch to McCree ever. They didn't try to switch to a soldier. And it wasn't working. I just feel like those two teams in particular, Hurricane and Gigante, are relying too much on their morals. They're sticking to the things that have worked for them in the past, or whatever is working for them in scrimmages. But they just got handedly taken down by Urki on consecutive maps because they failed to adapt to what he was running. And that just completely turned the control of that series. And, I mean, 0-4, despite, being a heavy favorite in both of those matches, does say a lot. So, we talked about how, EU was a lot closer to call, and today, I mean, pretty much cemented our thoughts on the overall region. This is what you can expect coming out of Europe. This is really anyone's game, and if you're considered, if you're considered a favorite, you can't be sitting too pretty right now.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I mean, sorry, just backtracking real quick to the Giganti thing too, is that right at the beginning when the Pharaoh was pulled out and they refused to counter it in some way, shape, or form, there was one moment of hope on Ilios where I was like, oh, they pulled out their own Pharaoh. They're going to start adapting themselves to counter comp a little bit. And that was the only time we saw it.
Mm-hmm.
Then we went to New Bonnie. Pharaoh came out again, and nothing was done to address it. But like you said, I think that just speaks to the fact that even the teams that we think are at the top have things that they can work on, and it's like you said, anyone's game. And I think that there's a lot in contenders that teams can gain by kind of expanding their horizons and becoming more creative about the way they address problems. And that's actually kind of leads into what I was going to talk about next, is that Contenders is cool because it creates a space that is professional Overwatch, but it's not Overwatch League. And the pressures aren't as great, I guess you could say. I don't really know. I've never done it before because I'm not good enough to get into Contenders, let's be real. But it allows them to kind of have this space where they're more willing to try new things. That was something that I really liked seeing today in Singularity's match against That's a Disband. Right at the beginning of Hanamura, excuse me, That's a Disband came out on defense on point A and used a Mei Ice Wall to set up their support line on the top of the far side building in the courtyard kind of thing. And that was something that I'd never seen done before, never even thought of, and I thought it was really cool. It's kind of similar to how you would boost up an Orisa onto the high ground on Temple of Anubis point A, is what it reminded me of. And they were running these really immobile supports, Zen and Ana, and I thought that it made sense to put them up there. It ended up not working out for them at all, but it was still cool to see the innovation, so I appreciated that from them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Temple of Anubis, because that was really one of the more popular Mei techs that we have seen, because they use the Mei Ice Wall to kind of set up in the back point of that building on the right side of the map. And, that's usually like an Orisa, a Widowmaker, and a healer, and then they have a second line of defense that is on that area right next to the bridge in front.
Right.
So they basically have two lines of defense, and it just makes it extremely hard to really be able to dive that back line to get to that Widowmaker. But, we do see tech from time to time. We get to see a little bit more of it in Contenders. But, you talked about the Hanamura one, and traditionally that is a tech spot that you can get up to with a Soldier 76, just doing Helix rockets, because you can actually rocket jump to that spot. But we really haven't seen that many teams doing the Maywall strat to get players up there. So definitely a different take on that. But, tech can lead to some interesting things. We've seen kind of rooftop ice skating with, Winston and D.Va players over on Volskaya, where you just kind of see them, gliding on the roofs, which is something. But,
Yeah.
it's really not used for anything. You could, delay, a drop down, essentially, but, really, techs are only really used in certain situations, and they're not always going to pay dividends, but, I do like seeing different looks being thrown out, and who knows, maybe it's something that you could try to incorporate, when you're on the ladder, things like that. But all in all, it was a really fun day for Overwatch, despite, the major upsets across the board. And at this point, it's really hard to say, what to expect from these teams, because one week a team shows up, then next week they get shut down. Some teams are just kind of stuck in that middle ground, but at the end of the day, this one is still, I feel like Europe, regardless of what's going to happen, is going to come down to the wire, because it's really just anyone's to take at this point. If someone can string together a few wins, that might be enough to just secure a spot in the playoffs just altogether, outright.
Yeah.
All right, Ren, well, it is that time for us to nominate our player of the week. So again, I turn it to you. Who are you going to nominate as the Impact player, whether it's NA or EU?
Well, I saw a lot of really cool plays from lots of different players this week. And I'm going to talk about one that we actually didn't talk about at all today because I kind of like to do that. Highlight as many people as you can, I guess, whatever. And yesterday in the match again, Optic Academy versus NRG, Smex of NRG was playing Roadhog a lot during that series, and I loved it. I thought he did really well. His
Yeah.
hook accuracy was off the chain.
Yeah, Hollywood was nuts.
Unintended. And and I was just impressed. You know, you don't see. I mean, you see Hog with some consistency, but not a ton. You know, and just seeing how much he brought it out and how impactful he was able to make it, I thought was definitely deserving of honorable mention. What about you? Who do you think really stood out this week?
I mean, if we're talking about like what happened today, I'd have to go with Urki from Angry Titans. You know, whether it was in the sky, on the Pharah, or on the ground with the Genji, just destroying the backline. I mean, Urki single-handedly really shut down Giganti in that series. And, you know, regardless of Giganti, you know, staying to the morals, it did not do them any favors against Urki today. So for me, like, he was really the standout of that series. And you know, when you talk about the favorites, Giganti is definitely at the top of that list, right by British Hurricane. So, no, kind of going back and forth. It's either, you know, one week I'm EU, the next week I'm NA. So who knows? Maybe next week, throughout all of the games, I will have a really good NA standout. But for this week, it goes to EU. But that being said, guys, let's go ahead and close out the show. Again, like next week, we got so much to cover. So bear with us next week. Because the way the schedule worked out, we only had, like, really, like, 1 day worth of games, so we only had to cover 6 today. And we couldn't even cover all the games today because NA is going on literally right now. But if you would like to help out the show, guys, one of the best ways to do that is to leave us a review over on iTunes. Again, that is for Overwatch League Network. You can find both the main show, which is our flagship, Overwatch League Network, and the back cap on the same feed. Any sort of feedback will just offer us some insight on how we can improve to make for a better listen experience for you guys. And Ren, why don't you go ahead and let everyone know where they can get a hold of us, whether that's email, Twitch, all of the good stuff.
Yeah, if you guys want to email the show, you can email us at owlnshow@gmail.com. We are also streaming on Twitch right now. If you're here in the chat room, you obviously know that. But if you don't, you can follow us on Twitch at twitch.tv/owlnshow. We did recently hit affiliate, so you can support us by subscribing and unlock our new our network emoticon. So I definitely wanted to say thank you to everyone who's been watching the shows live. Having you guys here makes a big difference, and it helps us know that we're reaching out to the community, and we really enjoy that. So if you want to catch us live, definitely do that. We're on 3 nights a week. We have, like Totem said, the Overwatch League Network is on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific. We have the Back Cap on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, and Heroes Never Die on Thursday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific. You can also join our Discord. We got a great community over there at discord.me/OWLNshow. We are also on YouTube. Just search for Overwatch League Network and we'll come right up. We're almost to our custom URL, so if you can help us out by subscribing to the channel, we definitely appreciate that. All of our podcast episodes, top plays, and other videos can be found over there. And that about wraps up where you can find the show, but where can people get a hold of you personally, Totem?
Well, you can find me over on Twitter at TimTheDrunkCTR. I normally don't stream on my Twitch, so usually if I am streaming, it will be on this current channel, so twitch.tv/OWLNshow. And Ren, where can people get a hold of you over on social media?
You guys can find me on Twitter at PrimalRen. That's Ren with 2 N's. I also stream very infrequently or inconsistently on Twitch, but you can find me at twitch.tv/PrimalRen. Yeah, and check it out, see what's going on over there.
But yeah, just like last minute thing, I did actually guest on Watchpoint Radio. That was, yesterday, yeah, assuming my days are all correct, yes, yesterday was Tuesday, yeah. That episode is out now. I had joined Blaze and Bob, a good buddy of mine, as well as one of the newer podcasters in the Overwatch scene, Icy Sorrow, so be sure to check out her new podcast, Enter the Iris. And yeah, I look forward to seeing more new content from her and the rest of the crew over there. But definitely check out Watchpoint Radio. That is one of the more long-standing, like, variety Overwatch podcasts out there. But for now, guys, that is going to do it for us here tonight on OWLN, The Batcap. Again, this has been episode 10. I'm totally drunk, and that is Ren, and we will see you guys back here tomorrow for Heroes Never Die. You guys have a good night. Thank you for listening to Overwatch League Network, The Batcap. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at OWLN Show. Engage with the community on Discord at discord.me/OWLN Show. And join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday night over on Twitch at twitch.tv/OWLN Show.